Sergio Gelbvaks from Nautilus MedTech in Brazil. And this is on using virtual reality to teach anesthesiologists in the use of pumps for total intravenous anesthesia. So it's a real life VR prototype course. So really looking forward to learning more about this. So Sergio, thanks for being here. It's great to see you. And I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to share your screen, what's convenient for you, and you can just take it away.
Good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the organization of this conference for the invitation to talk a little bit about our learning idea regarding training of anesthesiologists, and as such a specific but very relevant topic in our practice. I'm Sergio Gelbvaks, anesthesiologist and entrepreneur, founder and director of a health tech company in Brazil called Nautilus MedTech. Our purpose is to create and develop new and more effective methods of learning with a focus on teamwork and human factors into the healthcare systems. So I'd like to say that's a pretty new project developed by our company in a partnership with the pharma and edtech companies in Brazil, specifically in Rio de Janeiro. And I'm very proud to say that. Despite this partnership, I must declare that I have no conflict of interest. We developed this MVP in the beginning of 2020s, and we are ready to test in a presidential meeting in São Paulo, just when the pandemic COVID started and changed the way we live in the world. So till now, we couldn't test the product as we wanted, but I hope to do that as soon as possible. Besides that, I'd like to dedicate this presentation to the memory of all people who suffered from this terrible disease all over the world. Just in order to contextualize the reason of why we decided to do this kind of a learning project, and also supposing that many of the audience probably doesn't know about the anesthesiologist practice, I decided to begin with a brief explanation about one of the problems we face in our daily work and why it's so important to learn about this issue. The anesthesiologist is the guy that put you to sleep during a surgical procedure, as you may probably know. But more important than that, he or she is the responsible for keeping your physiological state under control and safe. The fact is that we work in a very complex and dynamic environment, frequently interfacing with multiple high technological devices. That makes anesthesia practice safer than years ago, but on the other hand, this complexity may also provide an environment more prone to errors and failures. So the medical community in general became more aware about medical errors in healthcare systems since the first report from the American Institute of Medicine from 1999. And today we all know that errors in the healthcare system is the third leading cause of death in the world, just behind cardiovascular and cancer disease. This is an alarming evidence. Again, in order to understand the context of our learning project, I must tell you a little bit about total intravenous anesthesia. So TIVA, total intravenous anesthesia, is a technique to provide anesthesia to someone else through injection of anesthetic drugs intravenously. That can be done by bolus injections from time to time, according to the patient status during surgery, or by infusion pumps in a continuously way. The great advantage in using infusion pumps for anesthesia is to keep the anesthetic drug concentrations more stable and reliable during the procedure, sometimes with less side effects or complications. But not always that's true. Even when using infusion pumps, especially those manually programmed, some errors may occur. For example, in this study, we can see that there was a high incidence of infusion rate errors, basically caused by an error in the infusion pump programming. So in order to deal with this problem, some new infusion pumps appeared on the market in the last few years, so-called smart pumps. The difference is the implementation of a software inside them, such mathematical models that can calculate automatically the adequate infusion rates for your purpose during the anesthesia. It means that smart pumps are more reliable and safer than the manual ones, but still there is a problem. In a very recent review in meta-analysis, we can say that together with the technology comes the complexity, and that makes anesthesiologists refuse to use them or use them inappropriately in their clinical practice. So, in the bottom line, it's all about human factors, and that's our main focus of study, essentially. And besides all that, medication errors have a huge economic impact in the healthcare system. It means an average cost of about $4,700 per admission, according to Bates and colleagues in this study. So let's talk a little bit about the TIVA experience. TIVA experience is a kind of course done in a partnership project with Aspen Pharma in Brazil. It was already great innovative in the way we decided to teach anesthesiologists, especially those who are in training, in the use of a new device for total intravenous anesthesia. As I said before, there are some barriers to start using new and complex devices in healthcare systems that limit their use and even can harm the patient by their misuse. In this learning model, we decided to use realistic simulations to reproduce the context of a real anesthesia practice and give the students the opportunity to manage and deal with the specific infusion pump and the eventual troubleshoots during these scenarios. In this period of time, we've trained more than 400 students, anesthesiologists in their last years of residence in the TIVA experience program. And here are some of the results. Despite there was a first reaction evaluation, we can see at least that was very acceptable by them. In this graphic, they rated some of the activities we did in this presential program, and they rated very well. Okay. But in our vision, as educators, there were some barriers. There are some problems here. Let's say limitations problems with this TIVA experience. That's a presential course. There were a limited number of students per course, limited time for hands-on practice, limited resources, human and material, limited investment, and limited face-to-face interaction, especially because the COVID-19 pandemics. So those were some of the motivations that inspired us to think about new solutions for training. And that's why we thought about virtual reality as a new idea for learning. So our biggest challenge when I start to think about this was to be able to transfer our experience with simulated classroom teaching to virtual or distance learning, maintaining the same principles of this methodology. And I think that's the same problems most educators face around the world when they have to transfer the presential learning to a kind of a distance of virtual or any kind of distance learning. That they have the same problem that we are facing. So the basic principles that we used to use during simulation training follows the adult learning theories. In general, our students' audience tends to be self-oriented, internally motivated. They prefer to learn by experience, hands-on, and the content must be meaningful for them. That's basically the COPE's learning circle. It means first, the student is submitted to an experience, more realistic is better, in general accompanied by feelings that remains in the long-term memory, making links for future reminds of the similar experiences. The reflection phase is a very important to realize what happened in simulated realistic experience. It's an observation exercise done by a facilitator or even by the peers. Effective reflection leads to reach a state of abstract conceptualizations about the specific contextualized event they just experienced. And then the students may be submitted to a new context or a new experience to test if their conceptualization were right or not, if the decision made were good or should be better. That's done in an infinite way till masterization of skills. And that leads to transformation that for us means learning. And finally, we've got to the virtual reality project. This is an MVP product done again in a partnership with the Aspen Farm in Brazil. At this moment, we developed only part of the interactive experience project as I showed you. That's a very new way to teach about the usability of an infusion pump for intravenous anesthesia. The learning objectives here were to set the correct parameters in a virtual infusion pump, to induce an anesthesia with other anesthetic drugs to see the interaction with effects, to deal with troubleshoots during this scenario, and to exercise some non-technical skills to manage a critical situation among the team. For those proposed, we had to create a virtual environment that was a surgical theater, a virtual patient, virtual devices to provide anesthesia, including a totally virtual and manageable infusion pump. And besides the design, there is a huge simulation program in order to give information in real time and in a logical reactive way to students' actions. Information to make decisions comes from the monitors, the call boxes, and from the avatars into the platform. At bottom line, the student must set up the infusion pump according to the context given, induce an anesthesia with other drugs, and make decisions to solve some problems during the scenario. At the end, the students get a feedback about their actions with suggestions for future experiences. They also rank students according to their performance in the platform. And now I'd like to show you a short video that's a demonstration of this virtual environment. And I will explain to you some things here. So that's the introduction. It's like a tutorial for the students when he puts on the glass and enter into the virtual environment.
Todos os botões que há um ícone de mão podem ser apertados. A seguir, vamos aprender como interagir.
In this tutorial, they are explaining what the student has to do in this virtual environment. So there are syringes with some anesthetic drugs, what they have to do with the syringe, how they can manage this syringe, to handle this syringe, how can they use the syringe. So all this is a tutorial.
Esse é o nosso centro cirúrgico.
And that's the virtual environment with a virtual patient, and virtual monitors, virtual machine, virtual devices.
Podem ser administrados no paciente.
That's here the virtual infusion pump. And that was made in such a way that could be totally manageable by the students. As you can see here in this video. The idea was to induce a total intravenous anesthesia to this patient using anesthetic drugs as usual. And all these parameters in these monitors here, they react to the dignity to any action of the students during the scenario. So if he injects any drug for amnesia, for sedation, so all parameters will change automatically. Here's the student managing the infusion pump, using the infusion pump, setting the parameters. And here in this environment, he can do any errors, any mistakes that he could do with no patient at risk. once the patient is asleep with this anesthetic drug, one problem occurs during the surgery. So there was an obstruction here in the infusion, and the patient stops to receive the anesthetic drug. So what happens next is the patient begins to arousal from the anesthesia, and the surgeon here is an avatar, claims to the anesthesiologist what is happening, what's going on. The blood pressure is going up because the patient is not receiving this drug. So the task to the student is to discover this obstruction, to find this obstruction, solve this problem, and then adjust again the infusion rate in order to put the patient asleep again and to get down the blood pressure, and the surgeon could continue the operation, surgery. So there was a simple conflict, a simple crisis here that student has to resolve, has to deal, to manage with other members of the team. And at the end, the student gets a feedback and the ranking based on their actions during this scenario. So for the future, we hope to develop the entire TIVA experience, that's a presential course, develop this entire into the VR model of learning. It means create a more engaging and self-oriented platform, probably using some kind of artificial intelligence to guide the students over the path of new knowledge. And that's our new big idea for learning, using virtual reality to train anesthesiologists, and a specific task that's using a new device like this infusion pump, for example. That's it. Thank you all for the attention.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That's really interesting what you're doing. There's a little bit of time for questions, and I'm also curious a little bit about, so I think I saw at the end, there's feedback at the end of the scenario. Are there times where there's feedback anywhere else, or it's all at the end? So, you know, yeah, are there mistakes that you would make that you would get feedback immediately because they're so significant?
Yeah, we can see how many mistakes the student did in the platform and put it in the feedback.
Okay. Okay, so you wait till the end, but you're counting the mistakes that they made.
Yeah, we are trying to put some gamification into the platform. So we thought about the ranking of the students. So those that make more score, they are pointed at the top of the ranking, things like this. And we are testing how the public will react to this.
When they get the feedback at the end, does it explain the mistakes that they made, or is it more just the score at this? I know this is the MVP. Is it?
Yes,
at this point?
Because the idea is to put all the TIVA experience, that's a complete course, into the platform. So there are theoretical content also in the platform. So if they did mistakes in the virtual environment, probably they have some gaps on knowledge or in other skills. So they have to come back to knowledge or to some knowledge source to study more, and then come back to the experience. So it's a continuum, it's a cycle. So they do mistakes, and they come back to study more, and they try to experience again and see the results. That's the idea.
Yeah, no, okay, that's great. Does the system tell them what to study, or is it really up to them to figure out what they think they need to go back and look at if they make mistakes?
We're just trying to see how they will react to this. Okay? The acceptance, the usability. We are in a very incipient testing, and beta testing, as you can call this.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. How did the process work, just in terms of creating and developing this? If you can tell us a little bit about sort of how this all got done, and kind of what the different roles were. I think the audience would be curious about it. the people involved?
How the process was done?
For how you created this. So who were the people involved? Who, how did we go from idea to creating this whole VR environment?
I had the idea.
Uh-huh.
The idea came from my experience with the simulation, the clinical simulation, medical simulation, and the Nautilus Meditech is a content company. So we had to work with a tech company that developed all the virtual environment and all the programming, the things. And we had a client that was the pharma company. So we did all the partnership between the three companies that we worked together. So meanwhile, that's the way we are working here. We are just testing how people will receive this kind of training. But it's a pretty new modality to teach someone else, especially adults, especially anesthesiologists. And we are just testing the reaction and see how the people will receive this. I think, I have a feeling that will be very well received, very well accepted. And then the next step is to develop all the course in this modality. So also the theoretical content, to put it in some kind of a distance learning modality, maybe using virtual reality or not, but all the content of the course will be in the platform. So it will be very easier to do this, especially in this time of pandemic. So that's the idea. I think, I have a feeling that will be very acceptable by the people.
Yeah, no, I would think so. Have you had a chance to test on the real audience a little bit so far, or not?
We are just testing just now because the pandemic here is diminishing, is reducing. So we are starting to come back to presential courses, and during this presential course, we are putting the Oculus Quest, and testing with some people for experiences.
Okay, good. So it's too early to know what they think, but you're certainly optimistic that they're going to feel.
Yeah,
it's
really it's just an example of how to use virtual reality to teach in some specific issue. I'm trying to do this also with the area management for anesthesiologists, and is another project that I'm trying to do here in Brazil. Even my thesis, master thesis in the University of São Paulo, we are just starting to try this kind of a modality for learning.
That's great. With the during the rest of the process, I'm curious to know how you worked with the technical companies. They were going to program it, they were going to build this, but I assume you had to sort of explain what you needed to create. And so I'm curious to know sort of what the roles were, where did they get involved, and where was it kind of, something that you were able to just dictate to them?
Yeah, what I have to do is to sit with them and explain how is all the process of thinking during a scenario. Okay, I have to imagine what the students may do or may not do during a scenario, and put this thing programmable setup already in the platform, in the virtual environment. So when the student gives a dose X, so the patient will react in such a way. If the dose is another, so the reaction is different. So we have to prevent all these actions from the students and put maximum options we can do into the program that is in the environment.
No, that makes sense. Did you sketch a lot of these things out, or was this all kind of done through conversations with the software company, and then they would kind of run things by you? I'm just curious to know how I've worked in this way in a lot of different roles. I'm curious to know how it worked with you.
Yeah, I've saw that there are some people here in the conference that use this kind of things. As Fernando, I've talked to Fernando already.
Okay. Yeah.
About this, and then maybe we can should do some kind of experience or partnership here using these kind of technologies. But it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you worked with your software company that you worked with, did they you had conversation with them? Did you kind of have to write out like, kind of each decision point, like each point in the in the virtual world where something could happen, and then they would program based on those and what the consequences were?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I had to sit with them. Indeed, they were in São Paulo, and I am here in Rio. So, but I sit with them. It was just before the pandemic. I sat with them, and then we did it together. It's just an MVP. It's a little part of the whole project.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just curious about the process. So then, did you review certain versions of it before it went? You were the primary reviewer before it got as far as it did. Like they would give you things for you to test and review in the VR world, and you could give feedback.
No, we have very few feedbacks from this project.
Right, so early.
Yeah. Right.
Great. So then what's coming up next? So right now you're kind of getting serious about the testing, right? So you're at the good stage to get a lot of people to test.
We are doing many TIVA experiences here. Once a month we have a course. It's presential course. So during this presential course, we've already will test some people to put the glass and see the reactions. If we get some more resources, also we'll develop all the entire course. That's the idea. And then spread it to others, to other places that are interested in this kind of training. Aspen Pharma was worked with us as a partnership, but Aspen Pharma is a multinational company, so they are in a very in many countries, also here in Brazil. But this experience is unique in the world for them. Okay, is any place is the only place in the world that did this kind of experience of idea, a new modality of training. The same way I tried to make some partnership with other companies that have some interest in the training in some devices or materials or special tasks, and then I talk to them and develop some curriculum using new modalities of learning, or combining them to reach the best results that we can to learning of the public.
Great. So there's a lot to look forward to. So I know you said you wanted to, after the testing results, then expand and make create a much larger virtual reality environment.
I hope next year I could bring to you some more results, more effective results about the usability of this modality, with the more responses, more results from the students, not from the public, about this.
Great. I'm looking forward to it. Well, thank you so much. I think we're just about the end of the time. It was great to see this, and I'm excited about the future of it, and really glad to have you here. So Sergio, thanks for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. It was my pleasure.
Absolutely. Hope to see you again next year with more. So really looking forward to that already.